You are not alone. Emotional support for miscarriage, infant loss, and infertility is traditionally focused on women. Men often feel that they have nowhere to turn for support when dealing with these issues. It turns out you're not alone. Hundreds of thousands of other men struggle with this too. When a man experiences such a loss, it's devastating not only for his wife, but also for him. The trauma of this event affects his relationships and his spouse, with work and his family, and I'm screwing that up, but that's okay. So it really screws with everything that you have to do, and you have to be strong for your partner, right? So we have to be strong for everybody, and we're still going through things. This is from the website of my next guest. I met him when I was on a trip to Israel visiting my son, and his coach was a friend of mine and said, you have to meet this guy. He is building something that's really essential and really important. And when I heard Daniel Landau's story and what he's creating, I immediately thought, how can I support him? Let's have him on the podcast and have a few thousand men listen to this story, because I know it needs to be told. So officially, Daniel Landau is the founder of Men's Helpline. He holds a bachelor's degree from Queens College in political science and a master's in nonprofit management and leadership from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which means he wasn't planning on doing what he's doing for a living now. Once heading up various organizations, fundraising, sales, and business development departments, he changed the course of his life after facing the trauma of a miscarriage. After the miscarriage, he realized that there were no resources for men, as the focus is always on the woman. He started the nonprofit organization called Men's Helpline shortly thereafter, and has been reaching out to help other men who suffer from miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirths, and infertility, so that they can be heard, recognized, and support one another. And my guess is be better partners to their spouse. Daniel, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark, for having me.
You know, I'm really, what you do is really vulnerable, because, again, you're going out in the world and saying, I needed help and I couldn't find help. Right. And I couldn't handle being there for my wife on my own. Right. And, in a masculine society, we don't want to talk about what we consider weakness when it's just being human. So I'm really impressed by your courage, your bravery, and the power that you bring to this.
Thank you so much. Listen, it's really difficult when you suffer a miscarriage or going through infertility, being a man. You're always told to be strong and be there for your wife. But really, we're really suffering internally. So yes, starting the organization Men's Helpline to help men going through it was really, really needed, because I was suffering in silence and so many others were. And we all need help when going through this.
So would you be willing to go through the painful origin story that got you to build this?
Sure. So my background, my story is, my wife and I got married 5 years ago. We were set up, and we always knew that we wanted to have children. So one of the things that you do, being religious, is you get genetically tested. So my wife and I got genetically tested, and we found out that we were carriers for two of the same genetic conditions, which meant that if we wanted to have kids, we had to go through the IVF and PGD, also known as pre-genetic diagnosis testing, in order to have children. So part of that process, what happens with the IVF and the PGD testing, is they take my blood, my wife's blood, her parents' blood, my parents' blood. They send it to a lab to try and pinpoint exactly where the gene is coming from. So what had happened was, part of this process, we didn't know this at the time, but what had actually happened was they completely mislabeled the blood results. They had wrote that my father was the carrier for this condition, when in actuality it was my mother. So what happened? They transferred an embryo that at the time we didn't know was infected with the condition. And that pregnancy, after the transfer, wound up having a miscarriage. So at the time of that miscarriage, this was 2.5 years ago, I was working in a high-tech company, and my boss told me, you have a quota to hit. There's numbers,
This is after the miscarriage and after you went back to work.
The miscarriage had just happened, and I told my boss, I need some time off. Like, this is
Mm.
not,
Oh,
I was not coherent at work. I need some time to think. And my boss told me, hey, you're a guy, I'm a woman. I go, I don't know that I necessarily been through this, but you got to be strong. You have a quota to hit. I was just completely lost. I needed some time to think and to process. And the only resort that I really had was a couple of Facebook groups out there for men. And I posted, hey, anyone else having these feelings? My feelings and my thoughts were, who am I as a person? What am I doing for my career? I did everything I could in my power to make sure I have a child. Why did this happen? Did I cause this?
mm.
Where am I living? Should I move back? I'm in Israel. Should we move back to the States? And just figure out what
So this
went
this
wrong.
triggered your questioning everything going on in life.
Correct. So from the miscarriage, I was just lost. There was no resources, and this really triggered all of the emotions.
That's why they haven't heard. Like you talked about all the things that went through your head. Now, what are you feeling?
When the miscarriage happened, I was feeling emotionally saddened. I was trying to figure out how to support my wife through it. I mean, nobody ever in the emergency room really tell you, how are you doing as a guy? The number one focus for them is the woman who's the patient. So when I was in the emergency room waiting to see what was going on, schedule procedure, or she would bleed, nobody asked me how I was feeling. So my emotions was, oh my God, what is going on here? Even though I'm medically trained as an emergency medical technician and I deal with patients all the time giving birth and miscarriages and all sorts of crazy scenarios and traumas, I didn't think, it was in a situation. Instead of being there really for my wife and asking myself how I felt, I was selfish and I said, I don't want to get our car dirty, like my wife bleeding out. I don't want to get our car dirty. Let's take a taxi to the hospital. So
Oh
instead of calling an
no!
ambulance,
Oh no!
we took a taxi to the hospital. It was 10-15 minutes up the block away. And then we get in, my wife having trouble walking, she's kind of bleeding out a little bit, she needs a wheelchair to be rolled in there. And I'm just like mind boggled. How can I even, like, looking back on this, how did I even do that, having the medical
Right.
background that I'm trained in?
And
But
the
that
and the
moment,
guilt that must have come afterwards from being a little bit of a bonehead, right?
yeah, I mean, I had some guilt after, and it's funny looking back on it now. I laugh at myself sometimes. I'm like,
Sure.
really? I did that? I mean, whoa. I mean, granted, miscarriage happens to one in four pregnancies, and this is one in four pregnancies and a miscarriage. 1 in 8 couples struggle with infertility. 1 in 160 births end in stillbirth, and 1 in 1,000 babies die of SIDS every year. So knowing that, how did I realize the statistics and what's going on? Granted, we went through the whole IVF process, and I gave my wife shots, in order to have a child. Um, it was really, really hard because the emotional side of me was, I'm like, I'm supposed to be there for my wife, but yet I'm told to be strong. I have medical background. I'm trying to be involved in medical, but it was really painful to watch her
Mm.
go through it. And I hear horror stories. Thank God I didn't turn to alcohol. I tried to find other outlets through, singing and all sorts of things that I did. And I realized I was looking for more meaning in life. And I went back for my master's in nonprofit management because I said, hey, I have something here. I created this project in one of my classes to create a support group. I said, this is so needed
So
that men.
this whole thing that you're creating started in a class, like an idea in a classroom. So I love hearing that school works.
Believe it or not, it did. Although I spoke about, I wanted to do this for a while, and school kind of took it to the next level. But everybody who I spoke to, and all the professors, all the teachers in the classrooms, they're like, "This is a blue ocean, right? Nobody in the world is doing it because 99% of the time the focus is on the woman because they're the patient, they're the ones going through it, they're the ones carrying the babies, they're the one doing the shots, they're the ones going for the
And
retrieval.
even they don't get enough support, I don't think, right? Like they're focused on the women, but they're like, okay, you lost a baby, it's been a week now, can you really get back to it?
So there is help for women in a sense that there are a million organizations that women can call and have a hotline for and go to a support group. So when I tried to go to a support group,
Right.
it just didn't feel right to me because there I am. I'm sitting on a Zoom support call. I'm maybe one of two guys, and you hear the woman sharing their stories and talking about this trauma. And I'm like, this is not what I want. Like if I wanted to talk, it's like obviously therapy is important, but a guy doesn't necessarily want to go to therapy. A guy would rather go to a bar, have a drink with someone, go play a game of sports, go, go for a run, go play music, whatever that interest is of that particular man, or go on a retreat, go on a hike. There were so many things that these organizations that were out there that were doing, it just didn't reach us. And every single organization that I've spoken to and experts all said to me, we have trouble getting men to come to our events and to our support groups. And that is because the focus is not from a male perspective.
Hmm.
So all of this transpired into starting this organization.
Great. So someone goes, so now someone calls you guys and wants support. What can they expect?
So the first thing they could expect is an open, honest conversation. Number one, if they want to share their story, we have a podcast. They can share their story and talk about their experiences and give advice to other guys going through it.
What's the name of the podcast?
It's called Men Talk about miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility.
Okay, we don't have the link for that, so send that to me after.
It just started recording episodes now.
Great.
So I'll share that link.
So by the time this is aired, you'll have that.
Correct.
And we'll have it in the show notes. Great.
Correct. So we have a podcast for that. In addition, I have a little small WhatsApp group that people who I'm meeting, want to get involved. A Facebook group. We have a men's retreat on the calendar for September in Israel for 4 days. And then obviously we're trying at this point to build local communities. The idea that we want to do is we want to have many communities in each neighborhood. So let's say there's a guy I'm throwing out a community, but let's just say St. Louis, right? So there's someone in St. Louis and there's another guy locally in St. Louis in the neighborhood. I want to connect the two of them so that they have had similar experiences. They could talk to one another, they can meet up with one another, so that the way they have an outlet. So that's what we're doing at this point.
Nice.
The next step for us
Go ahead.
is to launch the hotline. Right now, people are reaching out via email or through Facebook, through various groups, but the hotline is the next big step for us.
When is that planned for?
I hope to have it operational in the next 90 days. That's my 90-day goal.
Okay, great. So by the time someone hears this, you should have this up and running. So I'm curious, so a guy's wife has a miscarriage and he's there for her, right? Because again, your job, I believe your job, immediately is to be there for her. But once like all the acute stuff is handled and you get to now go, wait a second, I have some feelings and thoughts here. What do you suggest? What do you suggest a guy do?
The number one thing that I suggest a guy do after a few months or whatever the case might be is to still talk about it, because no matter how long the miscarriage happened or that loss happened, it's always going to come up in conversation. A lot of times guys are telling me, I shut down. My relationship with my spouse, went downhill. And that causes people to really break down. So number one advice I would say is open communication with your spouse. Talk about it with her, cry with her, hold her, hug her, whatever you need to do to get those emotions out. Because the more
that brings up a question for me. So,
sure.
So I don't know that people deal with grief well, and I don't think people recognize what grief is. So I was working with a client today, and he hasn't slept in 4 days. He's not able to concentrate on work, and he's kind of irritable. And we're going and we're talking about some stuff, and then he just realized, he goes, "Oh my God, this is the anniversary of my dad's death." Right, and then tears start flowing. Like grief didn't show up as sadness. Grief showed up as irritability. Grief showed up as sleeplessness. Right. So I think people have trouble figuring out what the hell's going on with them.
100%.
So how, like, so how do you help men get in touch with something foreign to them, which is their emotions?
The number one thing, the way I think people need to get in touch with it is to find an outlet, whether it be through music, whether it be through sports, whether it be from taking on something, somewhat as a distraction, journaling, any way to sort of get those emotions out. It could be through music. Someone could write a song. Someone could decide, I'm going to run a marathon in honor, in memory. Whatever means necessary to connect with yourself without the pressure of, hey, if I don't do this, I'm just going to shut down. If you
Mhm.
put pressure on someone, especially from a mental health perspective, force them into therapy, they're going because their wife is dragging them in and they're not communicating at all.
Okay. We cut out for just a second there. So what you're saying is if the wife's dragging them, if the wife drags them into therapy, it may not work. They got to go at their own pace and kind of feel their way through.
Correct.
I've seen that all. Yeah, we tend to retreat when it gets to a little too close. So I get it. Because so can you tell me a little bit about what's on the other side of the grief? So after you actually allow yourself the grief, you actually talk about it, you share with people, and then it kind of right sizes as you start to move forward. What's available for you on the other side?
On the other side, that's a good question.
I'm asking a leading
After,
question that I think I know the answer to, so I'm just curious.
after the grief ends or leading up to the grief part? Because there's five
Um,
stages of grieving. There's the whole, acceptance, denial,
right.
the whole, all the five
So you
stages.
go
So
so you
which,
go through you go through that in a miscarriage. You go through the stages of grief,
correct.
right? So then you go through the stages of grief. So I'll rather than asking you a question, I'll my what I because what I experienced in you before this happened, right? You were a sales guy, you were dad, you were a dude, you did this, you did that, and all that stuff. Afterwards, after you went through the grief, now you're so open hearted, right? You're such a wonderful vibe to be around, and that's what I think is on worth on the other side is when you have grief, when you have tragedy, when you have some sort of great grief or crisis go on, and you actually process it. Now you're available for other human beings.
Yes. The truth is that when someone goes through grief, even myself, for example, I think that any hardship you go for happens for a reason, right? So the whole process of having a miscarriage, going through the infertility, the fertility treatments, and it made me a stronger person. It made my communication with my wife stronger. We feel like we're stronger together. We can get through anything. So grief does open opportunities at the end of the day. You never know why it happens, but at the end of the day, when it does happen and you accept it, it makes you stronger
Mm.
because any challenge you're going through at that point in time feels so easy after you go through this.
And it shored up your marriage beautifully. That's nice. And I got to meet your beautiful wife and your unbelievably adorable son. like other, he is just such a joy and so cute. Oh my God. So absolutely fantastic. So if people want to find you, how do they find you?
To find us, you can go to our website, menshelpline.org. You can go to our Facebook page. You can go to our Instagram, which is at men's and then underscore helpline on Instagram. Or you can shoot me an email or give me a phone call
Okay, and all of that's
or
going to be in
WhatsApp.
the show notes. So if you want to get in touch with Daniel in this organization, either because you've been through it and you want to offer your services, because I'm sure you could use people who to man the hotlines and be there for other guy. And by the way, best seat in the house is service. You want to work through your own grief and all that stuff. Go help someone else, and I think that'll change your life. I bet you creating this has just opened up a whole world for you.
Oh, yes. I really think that the fact that I went through it, I'm able to help someone is unbelievable. I'll tell you an interesting story. A couple of weeks ago, I didn't even realize I'd be networking with someone. But at the same time, I was doing a little bit of shopping. I was in the pharmacy and I saw a guy getting medications. I noticed what the medications were. So I pulled him aside. I said, "Hey, you have a second?" I want to tell you something about, what I'm doing. He's like, of course, who approaches someone in the pharmacy, right?
Right.
Like dads in America, they have HIPAA laws, but everywhere else, I'm being Jewish and in Israel, I'm a yenta, people like to talk. So
Yeah, having just come back from Jerusalem and nobody, there's no boundaries. So yeah.
Yes. So I pulled him aside. I said, hey, you have me, I want to tell you about what I'm doing. I started an organization helping men when dealing with miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility. You're not alone. I also went through this. If you want to talk, if you want to go to a retreat, get involved. And he gave me his number. And I sent him a WhatsApp, and he said to me, thank you so much for reaching out to me. No one's ever asked me how I'm doing with this. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so stressed. I have no idea what to do. And from that interaction and that communication, now I set him up with another guy who's in similar life stage, who's also gone through the fertility treatments. So it's incredible, the power of what challenges you go through and then being able to use those challenges in order to help someone else.
Yeah, it's so rewarding and makes it gives meaning to what happened for me. That's for me, by helping other people through tragedies given my own, right, that gives meaning to why I suffered, right? So Daniel, thank you for what you do, thank you for who you are, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So if you know someone who's dealt with this, and a lot of us have dealt with it or know someone intimately who's dealt with it, and if it's a dude who's holding it in and holding it all together for someone, share this with them. At least, that's kind of the least you can do, without the least intrusive. They can hear Daniel, and maybe there's an opening. I thank you for taking the time and the attention to spend time with us. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.